Estás viendo BronxNet. Tu voz, tu opinión, tu visión. Las opiniones expresadas en este programa son exclusivamente de los participantes y de ninguna manera reflejan las opiniones de BronxNet o sus patrocinadores.
On this edition of Dialogo Abierto, we welcome Bronx County Historical Society educator Angel Hernandez as we discuss the Bronx Historical Society, sites and honors here in the Bronx. So stay tuned. This and so much more is coming your way on Dialogo Abierto. Hola y buenas a todos. Soy Ramón Rodríguez y ustedes están viendo una edición de Diálogo Abierto, un programa para la comunidad hispana donde información necesaria se provee y donde le pedimos que se puedan involucrar desde sus casas. Today is May 9th, and remember that we want to hear from you. So send us an email or call us at 718-960-7241. Also, remember that you can find this episode and past episodes at Dialogo Abierto at BronxNet.org. We have with us today Angel Hernandez, who is going to share with us information about the Bronx and also about a very special resident of the Bronx that was here quite a while ago, whose name you might remember or be familiar with, and that is none other than Edgar Allan Poe. First of all, Angel, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And taking time to share with us and our viewing audience some of the history of really this great borough. Right. I know that over the past probably 3 or 4 decades, it's been more commonly referred to as El Condado de la Salsa.
Yes.
But certainly, while that is a great part of its history, from the musical perspective, it has a lot of other historical value
Absolutely.
and perspectives as well.
Right.
So before we get into some of the anecdotes that we were talking about before the show, tell us a little bit about what the Edgar Allan Poe cottage that I know has recently been designated as a historical landmark, right. Where it's at, what it means, the effort that it took to restore it, how were the funds gotten to restore it, right. and your connection to it, and where you see it going from here.
Right. Well, the Edgar Allan Poe cottage is now located on the Kingsbridge Road in the Grand Concourse. And
a major crossroad
along
the
yes,
concourse.
One of the busiest intersections in the borough. And it's north of Fordham Road, which is the busiest commercial district in the Bronx.
Right.
Edgar Allan Poe was considered one of the best writers in American literature. And he came to live in the Bronx in 1846. People think, oh, well, why would he move to the Bronx? It wasn't called the Bronx at the time.
Where did he come? Where did he move from?
He was moving from a place called Turtle Bay, which is now where the United Nations is at today in Manhattan.
Okay.
And in 1846, Manhattan was very overcrowded. It was very dirty, no working sewers. So it was a very unfortunate situation for Poe because his young wife was dying of tuberculosis.
I see.
At the time, there weren't any cures for tuberculosis, so the doctor would tell you to go out to the countryside and breathe in as much fresh air as you can to cure your lungs. In 1846, this part of New York City was the countryside. This place was called the small village of Fordham. It was located in Westchester County, and when Poe got here, there was nothing. It was farmland. You had St. John's College, which is now Fordham University. You had the very first train station on the mainland, which is now where the Metro North stop on Fordham Road is at today.
I see.
So there was a lot of stuff going on in the 1840s in the Bronx, and this is why Edgar Allan Poe got here.
And of course, moving to the Bronx at that time from basically, Midtown Manhattan, what it would be today, it wasn't a quick subway ride.
No, it wasn't. No, Edgar Allan Poe actually made his way north. He lived in a couple of places in Manhattan before he finally arrived to the Bronx. But Virginia, his wife, she was very happy because she thought this was the type of environment she needed to get well. But unfortunately, just a year later in 1847, she died in the house anyway.
Oh, from the illness?
From the illness. Edgar Allan Poe died himself 2 years later in 1849, but we have the house still. The house represents a rich literary heritage in the Bronx, and there's also a lot of history behind it, not only about Edgar Allan Poe, but about the borough as well. It was built in 1812. The house just turned 200 years old. It's the last remaining structure of the village of Fordham. And to get it restored, it's been a long time coming. The first restoration before the last one was in 1913, when the house was actually moved from its original location to where it's at today inside Poe Park. So funds came. Most of the funds came from the federal government. There was a big grant called Saving America's Treasures, and it was a nationwide grant. Not only did it help restore the Poe Cottage, but also the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia as well. So there was a lot of historic sites throughout the nation that were getting this type of treatment as well. Some funds came from the city as well, and from the Bronx County Historical Society. And it was a job that it was long overdue. Edgar Allan Poe Cottage, although it's a wooden frame, and knock on wood, it hasn't been through anything, but yeah. But it needed that restoration, not only because it needed the fix, but we also need to usher the Edgar Allan Poe Cottage into a new era. It's a new Bronx today. The Bronx is considered one of the most ethnically diverse places in the world. Latinos consist of more than half of the population in the Bronx. So we really need to explain the story of Poe and Bronx history to our new Bronxites as well.
Now, speaking of the new Bronxites
Right.
and the history of this particular cottage and the connection of Edgar Allan Poe, obviously, to the borough, has that connection in any way resonated with those new residents of today, or maybe even more so with residents who have been here for a while, or in the surrounding area
Right.
of where the cottage sits?
Well, what I'm finding out is the parents, the new Bronxites, the parents that come from other places, they don't know about the cottage. They do know that it's an old house, it's historic. Obviously, it's surrounded by gates, so there's something special about it.
Right.
It's the kids. It's the next generation that know about it because they learn in school.
Okay.
So before I started at the Bronx County Historical Society, there weren't any bilingual tours, and to this day, we still don't have that. However, I'm starting a program, an interpretive program in English and Spanish,
Okay.
to assess and to have the house accessible to Latinos living in the area.
But wait. So when you say have it accessible, right now it's accessible.
It's accessible, but
only
who
on
is
a tour.
there? Yeah, but who's there to say it in Spanish? Who
I
is there
see.
to tell them Edgar Allan Poe was this famous poet? However, every time, this happened to me a lot of times. After a tour, I'm on the porch. People see me. Obviously, I'm Latino, and they'll stop me and they'll ask me, I lived in this area 10, 20 years. I walk by this house. I see people visiting. What's going on with it? What's so special about it? All I have to say was Edgar Allan Poe. He wrote The Black Cat, The Cask of Amontillado. Already, they're like, oh my God, I read that in Mexico. I read that in Guatemala. You just need to give them that extra information, and then they'll take it from there. So what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to implement a program, audio tours, and it's as simple as posting a phone number, a toll-free phone number,
Right.
and people can walk by and they can stop, call the number, and they'll be able to hear an audio tour, not only in English, but in Spanish as well.
Now, since I know that the Latino population in New York, obviously over the decades, has grown exponentially, and of course specifically here in the Bronx, I also know that even in the era of Edgar Allan Poe,
Right.
there were Latinos here.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering if perhaps there's been any thought given or any research done to identify some Latino name or some personality perhaps from that era
Right.
that somehow or other might resonate with the Latino community
Right.
to help make some connection and say, Sí, pero mira, aquí vivía este poeta y entonces aquí en esta casita al lado vivía fulano de tal.
Right, right.
Un colombiano, un mexicano, un puertorriqueño que había estado aquí ya hacían 20 años.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's maybe making that kind of connection. Right. But we'll pick up on that as soon as we come back from this break. We'll be right back with Angel Gonzalez and more about the Bronx County Historical Society right after this break.
Your education is the key to your future. And if you're a high school student, your next stop is college. A college education gives high school graduates a competitive advantage professionally and financially. Without it, your job opportunities are much more limited. A college diploma is a necessary requirement for any successful tomorrow. So make sure you're prepared. Speak to your guidance counselor. Visit your local colleges. Your education is the key to your future.
Hey, how you doing? Hey, girl, Nicole. Good luck on the play tonight. You're welcome. What's up, guys? And you're gonna make sure that you return those on Monday, right? Thank you. Oh, nice. Come on, let me get your water. Just get out the way.
Can you tell which of these children was not born free? Can you tell which of these children was not born equal? Can you tell which of these children does not deserve to be treated with dignity? We can't either. Human right number one. We are all born free and equal. What are human rights? Find out at youthforhumanrights.org.
Low-fat cheese sandwiches on whole wheat bread. Chewy and good for you. Snacks high in calcium help build strong bones. And foods rich in fiber are good for your heart. So you have the power to dominate. Can your food do that? Run, throw, think, eat better. Find out more at smallstep.gov.
Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us. So we continue our conversation with Angel Hernandez, not Gonzalez, as I said, as we went to break. So let's pick up where we left off, Angel, as it related to making perhaps some kind of connection between some people in the Latin community, limited obviously as it was in that era here, and maybe Edgar Allan Poe to sort of create some connection for the Latino population of today to say, wow, I didn't realize that even then I had some people from my country or from my heritage that were here.
Right.
Can you make some connection for us?
Well, one of the mistakes everyone makes is when they talk about the Latino migration into New York City, immediately they think about the Puerto Ricans in the 1940s and 50s. Puerto Ricans came in by the thousands. However, right before the Civil War, and just a little after Edgar Allan Poe lived in the Bronx, you had a group of Cuban students go into St. John's College, which is now Fordham University.
Okay.
And these Cuban students, they embraced the game of baseball. It was a popular sport already in America. And not only did they perfect it, but they actually took it back to Cuba and helped found Cuban baseball. One of these individuals was Esteban Belen. Esteban Belen, he was a Cuban young man, and after he played for the Rose Hill Baseball Club, which was the baseball club of St. John's College, he went on to play with the Unions of Morrisania. Now, the Unions of Morrisania was considered one of the first Bronx-based baseball teams in Bronx history.
Organized team.
Yeah. Now, it wasn't Major League, but
Right.
it was in the beginnings,
Right.
and they were the very first Bronx-based team to win a world championship in 1867.
So the Yankees can't lay claim to that.
Yeah, only in Major League, but when it comes to Bronx teams, we got to give it to the Unions of Morrisania.
Okay.
However, after that team, Esteban Belen went on to play with the Troy Haymakers, who became famous in the beginning days of baseball as well.
Okay.
Then he went back to Cuba, and then this explosion of Cuban baseball happened. So people think, oh, wow, then why didn't we know that? There weren't a lot of Latinos in the Bronx in those days. Put it this way, Esteban Belen, he wasn't even called Esteban Belen. His name was Stephen Belen because there weren't any Latinos, so they had to assimilate one way or the other.
Sure.
But it just shows how the roots of Latinos in the Bronx goes way back many more years. Before that, during the American Revolution, we had a person named Matthias Lopez. Now, we know he's not Latino because Latinos started calling themselves Latino after the 1860s. However, he's considered one of the first Hispanics ever to be mentioned in the history of the Bronx. Now, I did a little research on him, and he could have been a Spanish Jew.
Sephardic.
Right, Sephardic Jew. So I'm still in that research, but it's fascinating the type of information you can come up with just by giving in a little more research and a little more thought to your topic.
Ancestry.com.
Yeah, Ancestry.com too. I just last year, and I opened up a membership for the Bronx County Historical Society.
Right.
And I just started looking through, and I found so much information. You also had Inocencio Casanova, who lived in what we now call Hunts Point. And
Ergo the name Casanova Street?
Casanova Street, exactly.
Okay.
He had a mansion called Castello de Casanova, and it was the old Benjamin Whitlock mansion, which is Whitlock Avenue.
Sure.
And Inocencio Casanova, he was a wealthy merchant, came from Cuba, and he was also a staunch supporter for Cuban independence during that time. Cuba was trying to get its independence from Spain in the 1860s and 70s. Supposedly, his daughter, Emilia Casanova, she would have these revolutionary activities going on out of their house. Supposedly, there were tunnels under this mansion.
Wow.
And these tunnels were used to smuggle weapons back and forth to the island.
No
So
kidding.
that's just purported, but it's a fascinating story because here's another Latino. 1850s and 60s, no one really knew about him. They would see Casanova Street in Hunts Point, and they would think, oh, it's named after the lover. No, it was actually named after a Latino, a Cuban person who came to live in the Bronx.
And it's interesting you mentioned about the tunnels because with the limited familiarity that I have actually with that particular street, although I know it, but certainly it goes out to a water estuary right there on the borders, which will be the Bronx River.
Right,
part of the Bronx
absolutely.
River. Yeah.
So there was a lot of speculation about that, and although that hasn't been confirmed, it just shows, once again, how deep our roots go into Bronx history.
So before I get into to giving our viewing audience just a little more information about the Poe Cottage and when the tours are and the cost, et cetera, I'm fascinated by, of course, the area of expertise that you've developed, and I wonder what drew you to that historical perspective. I'm a devotee in a way of history myself, and so I'm fascinated by it, and I love to hear about it. What drew you to that?
Well, when I was an adolescent, my mom moved us out to California.
Okay.
And 3,000 miles away, you're in a different world, so you're homesick, especially if you come from a big city.
Sure.
So anything that had to do with New York or the Bronx, I embraced. A movie would come out, I'll watch it. A book would be written about New York. There was one book that I picked up at the library 3,000 miles away, and it was called History in Asphalt. And it's one of the books that we still publish at the Society. And it's an encyclopedia of Bronx street names and places. So I opened this book, I start looking up names, and I just grew fascinated about the topic.
And what's the title of the book again?
History in Asphalt, an
Wow.
encyclopedia of Bronx street names and places. And it gives you a history behind every street name in the borough, parks and other places as well.
Wow.
So, and it's a great book. It's been revised over 40 years. There's additions done to it all the time. And it brought me closer to the subject and for my love of history in general.
Sure.
But what I noticed in school, you do get a good amount of world history. You do get the nation's history. What about your neighborhood? What about your block? Where are you from? And that was the missing piece for me. And when I got back to the Bronx, I started studying more and more about it. Then a couple of years ago, I applied for some classes at Lehman College. And one of these classes was the history of the Bronx. And it was given on a Sunday afternoon. Mind you, I never took a Sunday class ever. Well, when I got there, it was perhaps one of the best classes I ever took in my life. The professor was Lloyd Otan. He is the official Bronx historian.
Okay.
And he saw that I knew my stuff, and he pulled me over one day, and he had asked me if I wanted to help him out with some research projects. So I started out as a volunteer at the Society, giving tours at the Edgar Allan Poe Cottage and the Museum of Bronx History. One thing led to another, and here I am.
And here you are.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. So going back to the cottage then, what can our viewers do to who would be interested in going on a tour? When is it? When is the tour given? What's the cost? And anything else that they might want to know?
Well, the Edgar Allan Poe Cottage is open to the public on the weekends, on Saturdays 10 to 4 p.m., Sundays 1 to 5 p.m. During the weeks, during the weekday, it's by school groups or other groups, by reservation only.
Okay.
And it's $3 at the door for students, seniors, and children, and it's $5 for adults. And what you would get there is not only a guided tour of the house about Edgar Allan Poe and about Bronx history, there's also a video upstairs. It's only a year old. It was made, actually made by BronxNet in conjunction with the Borough President's Office.
Okay.
And it's a great video. It's updated, and it's great pictures, and it tells the story of Poe, the way people should hear it. So we also have the Poe Park Visitor Center, which is just opening as well at Poe Park. So there's a lot of activity going on, especially this summer at Poe Park, and I encourage people to come visit the cottage sometime soon.
That's wonderful. Now, before we run out of time, and if you can synopsize it for us, I would greatly appreciate it, and I think our viewers would too. Okay, just tell us quickly how this wonderful borough got its name, because there are divergent stories.
Right. Well, I give the short version.
Real short, like 90 seconds.
The Bronx was named after the Bronx River. The Bronx River was named after Jonas Bronk. Jonas Bronk lived here for 4 years. However, after he died, the river was named after him. And there is a rule in the English language that I've read about that. If you name a location after a land feature, you don't use the land feature's name in the location's name. So in other words, we won't say we live in the Bronx River because obviously we don't live in the river. So we knock the river part off and we leave it as the Bronx.
And was this gentleman's last name spelt the same way we spelt the borough's name today?
No, it's not. It was actually spelled B-R-O-N-C-K.
Okay.
Jonas Bronk, and people think he was Dutch or Danish. He was actually Swedish.
Oh, okay.
And he was he came in 1639, and he settled his farm, which is now roughly 132nd Street and Lincoln Avenue.
Which has been yuppified.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. To tell you the truth, it's right across the street where the Bruckner Grill is at.
I know
that
it well.
That was part of his farm.
I know it well. The grill or the across the street?
I know both places. But he named it Emmaus because Emmaus is a biblical location.
Okay.
And he was a very religious man, and unfortunately, he only lived here for 4 years. No one knew how he died, but miraculously, after over 350 years, we still hold his name to this borough.
Wow, that's great. Well, Angel, it's been a wonderful education for me, and certainly I hope for our viewers, and I thank you for being with us.
Thank you for
having me. I hope you
me.
come back again.
I will. Thank you.
Okay. Y televidentes, a ustedes les doy las gracias por mantenerse sintonizado a este programa, pero lamentablemente se nos ha acabado el tiempo por hoy de esta edición de Diálogo Abierto. donde como siempre nos dedicamos a compartir información con la comunidad hispana. Es un placer visitar con ustedes en sus hogares y darles detalles de ocurrencias y oportunidades en nuestra comunidad. De nuevo les doy las gracias a nuestro invitado, al señor Hernández, y a ustedes por estar con nosotros. Hasta la próxima, les deseo muy buenas noches y nos veremos en la próxima edición de Diálogo Abierto.